So I'm going to try to explain the crazy idea to you that you should spend $1,000 on your first guitar. Now, I think this is a controversial idea because not everybody is going to have $1,000, so it doesn't apply to everyone, but it can still be a good idea for the people that it does apply to. Let's say it's niche. I'm a musician who does niche lyrics, such as a song about a guy that's going bankrupt. Maybe you're also interested in niche lyrics, so I'm going to put some links down below and I'll make a few pop-ups during the video. But everything I'm going to say in the rest of this video is just trying to explain that it could be a good idea to spend $1,000 on your first guitar. And so the very next thing I'm going to clarify is we're not talking about $1,000 new guitars. What I'm actually recommending is $1,000 used guitars, and a particular type of used guitar. There's sort of a range of kind of do everything you need it to guitars. And that's what I'm going to try to guide you to. How to identify one of these iconic high quality guitars that is not overly expensive. It's what's often referred to as a player's grade guitar. And the thing that distinguishes it from a collector's guitar, player's grade guitars focuses on the sound quality of the guitar, not so much bling, and then they tend to get used and a little beat up. But then the cool thing about player grade guitars is that kind of once they've been through the first few bashes and dings and get a few bruises on them, they're pretty durable. They will remain player grade guitars unless you really break them. So they get swapped around in the used market between experienced guitar players, and they never really lose value. If you buy used, you can sell used. But again, you're a beginner, so probably the more likely situation is that you're going to go to a guitar store. And so let's compare how these player grade guitars hold their value in the used market versus, say, all cheaper guitars. If you buy a $200 used guitar, and because they're kind of ubiquitous, they don't really have much resale value. You're probably going to have trouble getting more than $50 for it. If you buy a $500 used guitar, you might get $300 for it or $200 for it. If you buy a $700 used guitar, you might get $400 or $500 for it. If you buy a $1,000 used guitar, you might get $700 or $800 for it. So you see what the pattern here is, that no matter what you pay for your guitar, when you try to resell it, you're going to get back what you put into it less $200 or $300, unless you go really cheap, obviously. So that's the really important part about this idea, is that yes, it costs more upfront to buy this guitar, but a certain amount of that value is stored in the guitar like it's in your savings account. And I can completely understand how someone who's not really familiar with guitars, that feels really risky. I think it's a pretty uncontroversial idea that these player grade guitars tend to hold their value. So why would you really care about the details of this higher end guitar versus the cheap guitar when you're just a beginner? And the reason is that the guitar can either work with you or it can kind of work against you a little bit. So I'm going to pick up one of these guitars. So the first thing is the quality of the metal that is on the guitar, the bridge and the tuning pegs. The tuning pegs are these tiny little gears in here, and if those things are not quite accurate or they wear out over time, then they will be slippy. And a guitar has very fine tolerances. If these gears in here get slippy, what that means is that your guitar is slipping out of tune. That is one of the things that is kind of endemic to cheap guitars, is that they have cheap tuners that slip. Another thing on cheap guitars is this part called the nut. The nut is made out of different types of materials, and on cheap guitars it is very often made out of plastic. For a plastic nut, the strings tend to dig in and then they kind of get sticky in there. And when you're tuning your guitar, it doesn't necessarily move freely. It makes your tuning unstable, which unstable tuning I'm really hammering on because it can be very frustrating for a beginner guitarist to have an instrument that doesn't stay in tune. You will often not recognize that it is the guitar that's not staying in tune as opposed to your playing that is not in tune. So anyway, the whole point of this section was that there are certain things that need to be maintained that require labor input to a guitar, which makes them more expensive, or there are certain parts which, when you look at them, you can't really tell that they're cheaper, but they are cheaper. And these are the ways that you can cut costs to get a guitar price down, but it does affect its playability. Now I want to talk about gold standard models. How do I really find one of these player grade guitars? This is called Telecaster. Telecaster was actually originally designed to be a player grade guitar. You can see that it's a very simple shape, basically just cut out of a flat board. There's this legacy of Telecaster guitars not being all blinged out as well, but it has this history behind it and brand value behind it, yet originally designed to be a bargain guitar. And so that value kind of holds today. And if I were to recommend a single electric guitar model for your first guitar, I would say a Telecaster. But here's one of the other beauties about Fender. It still says Fender right here. Fender doesn't split their guitar line by brand. At first glance, the most expensive Fender looks kind of like the budget Fender until you get to the Squier models, which actually have a different brand on them. And so that's why I like Fenders, because in the Gibson world, this is an Epiphone guitar. So an Epiphone is a bargain version of a Gibson. The brands are owned by the same company, but the Gibson brand is reserved for their most expensive American-made guitars. In the Epiphone guitars that are just kind of copies of the Gibson versions, there are often some compromises. But you want to talk about player grade. Chips in the finish here. Chips in the finish here. Like, to me, this is a beautiful guitar because if I bang it, I'm not actually lowering its value. Versus a Gibson where everybody gets excited about whether it has the original parts. Nobody cares on an Epiphone. Epiphones are often treated by players as a platform. So you can get Epiphones with upgraded parts sometimes that are actually great player guitars. And so the other thing I want to point out about this guitar is it's a Les Paul shape, which is the most classic of the Gibson Epiphone line. And I'm sorry I don't have a Stratocaster to show you here today, but I'll find a picture. These three models, Telecaster, Stratocaster, and Les Paul, I think these are the gold standards. Pretty much every guitar player has one of those, or even all three of those. And so those guitars are both easy to find and they're easy to sell because everybody wants one. You know, if you've made it this far in the video, you're obviously not hostile to the idea of spending $1,000. You can ask me questions in the comments if you want, and I'll be happy to engage on that. It's certainly not the same thing as drinking $1,000 worth of wine. And we haven't even talked about amps yet, because that's a whole new world of making your electric guitar sound good. And again, I am the musician with diverse lyrics, so if you like these kind of interesting ideas, like spending $1,000 on your guitar, I hope you check out my music and the interesting ideas in my lyrics. There are links below for that. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a great time picking out a guitar and learning how to play it.